The moment you stop chasing, he starts wandering. And when you vanish like a mirage, suddenly you're all he thinks about. This isn't a game, it's psychology. And today, I'll show you exactly how to activate that deep desire in his mind without saying a single word. There is something profound that happens when we step back. Not in anger, not in punishment, but in presence, in silence, in deliberate space. Many people believe love, affection, or desire can be maintained only by constant interaction. They think that if they don't show up, if they don't constantly make themselves available, they will be forgotten or worse, replaced. But this belief is a misunderstanding of human psychology and a misalignment with natural law. The truth is, absence is not the enemy of love. It is its companion. Just as the night sky reveals the brilliance of the stars, distance reveals the depth of longing. When something is always within reach, we begin to take its presence for granted. Not because we are ungrateful, but because familiarity slowly dissolves the edge of wonder. Desire fades in the absence of contrast. A person who understands this doesn't disappear to manipulate. They don't retreat out of bitterness. They step back with clarity because they know that space is not a void. It is a mirror. In that space, the other begins to feel, to remember, to reflect, to imagine. And in that imagination, the memory of your energy expands far beyond what words or attention could accomplish. When you are always there, always replying, always showing up, always explaining, you remove the mystery. You flatten the terrain. But when you take a breath and allow space, you create contrast. And contrast is what activates emotional memory. There's a story of a woman who was in a relationship for many years. She did everything right, according to what most would suggest. She cooked, she listened. She was available whenever her partner needed. She answered every message immediately. She believed love meant always showing up. But over time, something strange began to happen. Her partner became more distant, more uninterested. It wasn't that she had done something wrong. It was that the relationship had no texture, no pause, no space to breathe. Eventually, she made a quiet decision, not to fight, not to beg, not to retreat in anger, but to live. She stopped waiting. She began to focus on her health, her passions, her morning walks, her stillness. She didn't withdraw in silence, but she also didn't push herself forward anymore. That absence created a ripple. Slowly, her partner began to notice. Not because she was doing anything to be noticed, but because her absence began to reveal the essence of her presence. When someone is used to your energy being freely available, they forget its value. But when that energy withdraws, not to punish, but to return to its center, it awakens remembrance. The mind begins to ask, where is she? Not just physically, but energetically. Why do I feel something is missing? And that question is the seed of emotional longing. It's important here to understand the psychological basis behind this. The brain's reward system, particularly the release of dopamine, is more strongly activated not by the presence of something, but by the anticipation of it. This is why uncertainty can heighten attraction. When you are always accessible, the brain adjusts. It stops releasing the same level of emotional engagement. But when availability becomes rare and meaningful, the system reawakens. Attention becomes focused again. Curiosity returns. This doesn't mean playing games. It means recognizing that space is part of the dance. Just as music relies on the silence between notes, relationships require pauses to feel the music of longing. Now, stepping into the second layer of this understanding, there is a deeper art to becoming someone who is missed. It's not just about removing your presence. It is about cultivating a kind of presence that continues to echo even when you are not there. This is the essence of the Mirage Method, to become visible even in absence, to be sensed even in silence. A mirage draws attention not because it is physically reachable, but because it represents something meaningful to the observer. It holds the appearance of something deeply desired, and even when one can't touch it, the heart leans toward it. Not because of its promise of fulfillment, but because of what it symbolizes. In this way, you must become a kind of emotional mirage, not a trick or illusion, but a presence that lingers in someone's thoughts even after you've left the conversation. This requires a kind of self-cultivation that most people overlook. It's not enough to simply step away. What do you leave behind when you go? A person who is always emotionally reactive, always complaining, always anxious. When they leave, their absence is felt as relief. But a person who brings calm, groundedness, depth, when they step back, their absence is felt as a loss. There was once a man who said of his former partner, "I never noticed how peaceful she made the room until she stopped coming." That's the mirage effect. Her energy wasn't loud. It wasn't dominant. It wasn't demanding. But it was nourishing. And when it left, he noticed not her silence, but the silence she used to fill with grace. To cultivate this kind of presence requires emotional stillness. You must first become the kind of person who doesn't need to be the center of attention to feel valuable. You must learn to anchor yourself so that when you leave someone's life, even momentarily, they feel that something stable has gone with you. Eastern philosophy teaches that power is not in noise, but in stillness. The mountain doesn't shout to be noticed. Its presence is enough. Similarly, when you become centered in your own life, your energy becomes memorable. There's also a psychological layer to this. People are drawn not to availability, but to emotional resonance. That is, the energy they associate with you. This resonance isn't built by constant communication. It's built by the quality of presence during the moments you're together. If, when you are with someone, you are fully there, listening, observing, bringing warmth and depth, then your absence will carry weight. The brain doesn't store every word we hear, but it remembers how someone made us feel. If your presence brings clarity, calm, inspiration, or intrigue, then when you are gone, those emotional imprints remain. Imagine someone walking into a room filled with incense. Even after they leave, the scent lingers. You can't see it, but it's there. It holds memory, emotion, feeling. You must become like that. A presence that leaves a trace, not in a manipulative way, but in a sincere, cultivated manner that naturally creates emotional memory. People don't miss noise, they miss meaning. So, ask yourself when you leave, what remains? What part of you walks with the other person, even in your absence? To develop this, begin with intentional living. Don't just be busy, be whole. When you're in someone's life, speak with clarity. Share with vulnerability, not desperation. Laugh without losing your center. Offer attention, not obsession. Then, when you step back, they feel the absence not of noise, but of presence. The mirage doesn't chase. It simply appears on the horizon, pulling attention toward it, not with force, but with gravity. In the same way, when you cultivate your internal life, your practices, your peace, your power, you begin to radiate, even when you are gone. This is what makes someone miss you instantly. Not your absence alone, but the contrast between who you are and what the world usually offers. Not your silence, but the richness that used to speak through your presence. And when that richness steps away, even gently, it leaves behind a question. Where did she go? That question lives in the heart long after the voice has faded. There is a kind of strength that cannot be seen in the body, a kind of radiance that does not come from appearance, and a kind of silence that speaks louder than any word. In relationships, this strength, this radiance, this silence is known as emotional precision. It is not about being cold. It is not about withholding or pretending not to care. It is about becoming deeply aware of what you feel and, more importantly, choosing when and how to express it. To respond rather than react. To breathe rather than explode. To pause rather than perform. We live in a world that has taught us to be fast. Fast in speaking. Fast in texting back. Fast in defending ourselves. But relationships, especially meaningful ones, are not forged in speed. They are forged in stillness, in reflection, and in the space between an emotion and a response. Emotional precision is the ability to feel something deeply without being ruled by it. It is the skill of understanding the difference between the trigger and the truth. When someone says something hurtful or acts distant, the immediate temptation is to react, to demand answers, to prove our worth, to cry, to yell, to leave. But the deeper path, the path of clarity, asks a different question. What is really happening inside me? Is this about them? Or is this about me? Am I reacting to their behavior? Or am I uncovering an insecurity I've carried for years? This internal questioning is the root of emotional maturity. Because most people do not fight with others. They fight with the reflection of their own pain, projected onto others. And when two wounded people communicate from that place, no truth can be heard. Only ego, fear, and defense. But when even one person steps back and says, I will not react, I will respond, but only after I return to center, the entire dynamic shifts. There's a story of a woman who was dating someone she deeply cared about. One day, he said something that shook her. Not because it was cruel, but because it touched a scar she had been hiding, an old fear of not being enough. Her first instinct was to lash out, to accuse, to withdraw her love. But something within her asked her to wait. She went for a walk instead. She breathed. She journaled. And when she finally responded, her words did not come from her wound. They came from her wisdom. I heard what you said. She told him, and I realized it stirred something old in me. I wanted to react, but I took time instead. And now I understand. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to share your own discomfort. I can meet you there without needing to defend myself. That response transformed their relationship. Not because it was perfect, but because it came from a place of mastery. She didn't deny her feelings. She just chose when to voice them and how. This is the art of responding rather than reacting. From a scientific perspective, the human brain has a part called the amygdala, the emotional alarm system. It scans for threat even in relationships. A cold tone, a missed call, a forgotten word. These small things can feel dangerous to a nervous system wired for survival. But just above the amygdala is the prefrontal cortex, the part of us that can reflect, reason, and choose. Emotional precision is the practice of pausing long enough to let that higher part of the brain take the lead. When we pause, we give ourselves the gift of perspective. And in that pause, we remember that not every action requires a reaction. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing, not from fear, but from strength. The kind of strength that understands timing, that respects emotion but does not obey it blindly. There is a difference between being silent and being still. Silence can be empty. Stillness is full of understanding. When you feel the fire of emotion rising, stillness says, wait, understand before you act. That waiting is not weakness, it is wisdom. This wisdom leads naturally to another truth in relationships. Your energy is your power, how you hold it, how you protect it, how you share it, and how you refrain from scattering it. There is a subtle difference between being a source and being a seeker. One looks outward, hoping to be filled. The other looks inward, knowing she already is. When you chase love, you forget your worth. When you embody love, others are drawn to you. Not because you demand attention, but because your presence is enough. Being a source means your value doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's behavior. It doesn't matter if he calls or doesn't, if he shows up or forgets. You are steady, not because you're indifferent, but because you are full. Emotionally, spiritually, mentally. You have cultivated a life that does not rely on someone else's validation to feel meaningful. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop begging. It means that when someone pulls away, you don't collapse. You return to yourself. You nourish your soul. You remember who you are. And in doing so, you become magnetic. There is a paradox in human connection. Those who chase are often pushed away. Those who stand still, radiating calm, are approached. Why? Because people sense the difference between hunger and wholeness. Hunger feels like pressure. Wholeness feels like invitation. Think of a garden. When it is well tended, full of beauty, scent, and life, people are drawn to it. Not because it asks them to come, but because its presence is healing. That is how you must become in your own life. Water your garden. Grow your soul. Let your energy become so full that your presence alone speaks for you. This is also supported by neuroscience. Studies show that individuals who display self-sufficiency and emotional regulation are perceived as more attractive. Their calmness signals safety. Their independence signals value. In a world full of emotional noise, stillness becomes a luxury. A woman once said, "He began to pull away, and I almost chased him. But then I remembered the times I had abandoned myself to get someone to stay, and I decided I will not lose myself again." So she turned her attention inward. She read, she rested, she created. And in that return to herself, she remembered that her life was not defined by who stayed, but by how she showed up for herself. When the man returned, and they often do, he found a version of her that was unbothered, at peace, not cold, but clear. And that clarity was more attractive than any message she could have sent during her moment of desperation. This is what it means to be a source. It means being the fire, not the smoke. Being the ocean, not the wave. Being the mountain, not the echo. From a relationship standpoint, this shift changes everything. When you are not chasing, you are choosing. When you are not seeking, you are attracting. Your boundaries become natural, your standards rise, and people respond differently, not because you demand it, but because you embody it. In practical terms, this means not always being the one to reach out. It means observing who makes the effort when you pause. It means paying attention to who values your energy without needing to be reminded of its worth. But more importantly, it means creating a life that is so deeply aligned with your soul that even if someone does walk away, you are still whole, you are still glowing, you are still the source. When you shift from seeking love to being love, everything changes. Not immediately, not always in the way you expect, but over time, people begin to see, to feel, to remember, not because you tried to make them, but because your energy left an imprint that couldn't be ignored. You become the kind of person who does not need to say, "Miss me." You simply become unforgettable. In the stillness between words, we begin to see. In the space between two people, we begin to feel what is often lost in noise, the subtle energies that speak when language fails. One of the most misunderstood qualities in relationships is detachment. For some, the word carries the flavor of coldness, of distance, of emotional abandonment. But detachment, in its highest form, is not a withdrawal from connection. It is a commitment to clarity. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of self-understanding. And in this kind of inner stillness, the heart begins to speak truth. Many people confuse being emotionally unavailable with being emotionally detached. One shuts down out of fear. The other opens up, but without clinging. One avoids emotion. The other observes it. To become truly powerful in love, one must learn to practice the second, detachment through clarity. This is the wisdom that brings peace, and it is also what makes you unforgettable. Because in a world where people often lose themselves in relationships, the one who remains grounded becomes the one remembered. There's an ancient proverb that says, "When the mind is still, the universe surrenders." The same principle applies to emotional dynamics. When you are still, not passive, not indifferent, but still, you become magnetic. You become the person who is not easily shaken. You become the one who is not moved by every gust of someone else's mood. And in doing so, you become a mirror, reflecting back to others their own instability, their own confusion, their own emotional inconsistency. This mirroring effect is subtle but powerful. Imagine two people in conversation. One is restless, reactive, quick to take offense or seek validation. The other is grounded, calm, and unbothered by the fluctuations of tone or attention. Over time, the reactive person begins to regulate themselves, not because they are forced, but because the calm presence beside them creates a contrast too obvious to ignore. That calmness, that emotional stillness, becomes a silent invitation to rise. This is how emotional detachment functions in healthy form. It invites the other person to meet you in clarity or step away, and both outcomes serve your peace. Now, in the context of romantic relationships, the ability to remain emotionally grounded, even when things feel uncertain, is one of the greatest tools of strength. Often, people lose their power not because of what happens, but because of how they react. A delayed message, a missed call, a change in tone. All of these small shifts create internal chaos in someone who has not mastered their own energy. But for someone who understands emotional detachment, none of these triggers are threats. They are simply signals to be observed without immediate response. Emotional maturity is the ability to pause, to feel deeply without acting impulsively. It is the difference between needing someone and choosing someone, and only from this place can real love grow. There's a story of a woman who had been in an emotionally turbulent relationship for years. Her partner was inconsistent, attentive one day, cold the next. And for a long time, she chased the highs and lows like a storm chaser, always hoping the warmth would return. But one day, she stopped chasing. Not because she gave up on love, but because she woke up to a deeper truth. She had been abandoning herself. She began to cultivate stillness. She didn't leave the relationship immediately, but she changed her way of being. She no longer fought for replies. She no longer tried to control his moods. She simply became still. She focused on her breath. She focused on her body. She observed her emotions without letting them dictate her behavior. And slowly, her partner began to feel something shift. The energy that once chased now stood silent. The fear that once pleaded now stood in peace. He asked her, "Why are you so calm?" And she replied, "Because I have finally come home to myself." This is what detachment truly is. A homecoming, a return to the center, a remembrance that no one else is responsible for your emotional weather, that you are the sky, not the passing clouds. Psychologically, this is supported by research on self-regulation. The ability to manage one's own emotional state is associated with higher relational satisfaction, reduced anxiety, and clear communication. When you are not emotionally hijacked by every shift in the relationship, you make wiser choices, not just for the relationship, but for your own dignity. Many people think that being deeply in love means losing control, that if you don't feel jealous or anxious or desperate, you don't truly care. But that belief is a symptom of emotional confusion. Real love does not arise from chaos. It arises from clarity, from the ability to see another fully without losing yourself in the process. And so, when you practice emotional detachment, not as avoidance, but as awareness. You become a sanctuary in the storm. Your presence no longer demands, it invites. Your words no longer react, they reflect. Your energy no longer reaches outward in desperation, it radiates inward in wholeness. This kind of energy is rare, and because it is rare, it is powerful. There was once a man who left his relationship convinced the woman would chase after him. She always had. But this time, something was different. She didn't reach out. She didn't send long messages. She didn't cry or plead. She simply allowed the space. She lived her life. She honored her emotions, but she didn't let them overtake her. Weeks passed. He began to wonder, to worry. Why isn't she reacting? The absence of her usual response created a new awareness in him. He began to remember her, not just as someone who needed him, but as someone who had her own light. And that light, now quiet and still, began to draw him back. But by the time he returned, she was no longer waiting. She had moved into her own peace. And that, perhaps, was her greatest act of love, not toward him, but toward herself. This kind of story is not about winning. It is about waking up to yourself, to your power, to your center. When you understand that being emotionally detached means being deeply connected to yourself, everything shifts. Detachment is not the death of intimacy. It is the doorway to authentic connection, because only when two whole people come together, not in dependency, but in clarity, can true union be born. And this union does not need drama to survive. It does not need games or emotional turbulence. It needs presence. It needs stillness. It needs people who can hold space for their own emotions without demanding that others fix them. To become this person, you must begin to practice inner awareness. Begin each day with stillness. Observe your thoughts without attaching to them. Notice the waves of emotion that rise and fall within you. Don't push them away. Don't act on them immediately. Just notice. Just breathe. As you build this inner space, you will begin to notice something profound. What used to trigger you no longer owns you. What used to make you panic now simply passes through. And in this space, you find something deeper than control. You find freedom. You no longer need someone to behave a certain way for you to feel safe. You no longer need to be needed to feel valuable. You no longer fear distance, because you know that your presence is enough, whether they see it or not. This is the quiet strength that shifts the dynamic in any relationship. Because when you no longer chase peace from another, you become peace itself. And in a world of emotional noise, that silence is the most powerful sound they will ever miss. When the river changes its course, the forest must learn to adapt. The same is true in relationships. When your presence is no longer constantly available, the dynamic shifts and the other person is forced to feel the new shape of your absence. It is in that space, when you're no longer readily reachable, that the true depth of your impact is revealed. But this absence, if it is to carry power, cannot be empty. It must carry energy. It must carry evolution. Because to disappear is not enough. To be missed, you must evolve while you're gone. Many make the mistake of thinking that silence alone will draw someone back. That if they pull away, the other will immediately recognize their absence and come running. But time does not heal if time is passive. Absence does not create longing if you remain unchanged. A vanishing presence that leaves no new trace behind becomes forgettable. A quiet presence that reappears stronger, clearer, more vibrant, that is unforgettable. The question is not merely, have they noticed I'm gone? The real question is, when I return, who have I become? Because people do not miss what was always there. They miss what they realize has transformed while they were not looking. There's a woman who once deeply loved a man who was emotionally inconsistent. He would come and go as he pleased, offering affection when convenient, then vanishing without explanation. She tolerated it because she believed her love would eventually teach him how to stay. But one day, she didn't just step back. She chose herself, and during that space, she didn't wait. She evolved. She focused on her breath. She nourished her mind. She built her life around truth rather than hope. Her silence wasn't hollow. It was full of transformation. When he returned, expecting the same soft heart to welcome him back, without question, he met someone new. Someone who had grown roots instead of clinging. Someone whose glow could no longer be dimmed by someone else's uncertainty. He didn't just miss her presence. He missed the version of her he had assumed would always remain unchanged. But she had outgrown the cage of his inconsistency. That was the moment he truly saw her. Not because she asked him to, but because she no longer needed him to. This kind of evolution is not loud. It does not require grand displays. It unfolds quietly, like a tree that suddenly blooms after a long winter. Those who pass by don't see the roots that deepened in the cold soil. They only see the beauty that could not be stopped. When you use the power of absence correctly, it is never passive. It becomes a sacred time to return to yourself. Not as an act of revenge, but as an act of renewal. You are not stepping away to punish someone. You are stepping inward to reclaim the parts of you that were fading in their shadow. Every step away from what does not value you must be a step toward what does. The energy you once poured into explaining yourself, chasing closure, proving your worth, reclaim it. Let it become the fuel for your growth. In neuroscience, this process is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through new behaviors and thought patterns. When you stop responding to the same emotional triggers, when you focus on new learning, when you engage in practices that cultivate your inner strength, your brain changes. You literally become someone new, someone who no longer needs what once made you feel small. This transformation doesn't require public validation. The point is not to show someone what they've lost. The point is to stop being the version of yourself that tolerated being misunderstood, ignored, or half-loved. When you evolve during your absence, your energy shifts. People may not understand what has changed, but they will feel it. There's a certain silence that speaks volumes. A woman who has evolved does not need to explain herself. She doesn't post cryptic messages. She doesn't argue to prove her worth. She simply carries herself differently. Her boundaries are clear. Her smile is unforced. Her time is intentional. And suddenly, those who once overlooked her begin to notice, not because she demanded attention, but because she no longer needed it. This kind of energy is what lingers in someone's mind. It creates a contrast between who you were and who you've become. And that contrast is what makes your absence echo. The human psyche is wired to notice change. When something or someone evolves unexpectedly, it awakens the part of the brain that seeks understanding. What happened to her? Why does she feel different? Why do I miss her energy even more now? These questions arise not because of emptiness, but because of transformation. So when you step back from someone, you must also step deeper into your becoming. Do not wait in silence, counting days. Move in silence, becoming rare. Rare in your discipline, rare in your grace, rare in your refusal to remain emotionally available to what no longer meets your soul's standard. Consider a lighthouse. It stands still, unmoved by the waves, but it evolves over time. It's cleaned, strengthened, maintained. Its light becomes brighter, its structure more stable. When sailors return to that coastline, they don't just see a building. They see a symbol of safety, of clarity, of unshakable strength. That is what your energy must become. So ask yourself, when you are gone, what are you becoming? Are you resting or resisting? Are you healing or holding on? Are you blooming or waiting? Because when you return, not to the person, but to the world, it will be evident whether your absence was filled with bitterness or brilliance. You are not vanishing to be chased. You are retreating to refine your light. Let your silence be intentional. Let your solitude be sacred. Read what nourishes your mind. Move your body. Create something meaningful. Tend to your spiritual practices. Not because it makes someone miss you, but because it reminds you of who you truly are when you are not performing for love. There's a quiet strength in a woman who no longer waits to be seen. She sees herself, and that self-seeing becomes a kind of glow that no one can look away from. Even those who let her go begin to feel it, an energy that is no longer pleading to be accepted, but is now radiating from a place of inner alignment. People miss energy that once made them feel safe. They miss conversations that held no judgment. They miss the softness of someone who listened without agenda. But they especially miss the presence of someone who used to give them access to something sacred. Someone who, when absent, leaves behind not silence, but a question. Who is she now? Let that question rise, not as a performance, but as a reflection of your inner expansion. You don't need to disappear completely to be missed, but you do need to evolve genuinely. Not to make them come back, but so that if they do, they meet someone they no longer recognize. Someone stronger, softer, wiser, and no longer willing to shrink. This evolution is the true essence of the Mirage Method. You are seen even when you're not there. You are felt even when no words are spoken. You become a presence too strong to forget and too rare to replace. Not because of what you say, but because of who you've become while no one was watching. A river that disappears only to return deeper and clearer changes the landscape forever. Be like that river, quiet but inevitable. When you stop chasing validation and begin embodying presence, you no longer need to make someone miss you. You naturally become unforgettable. What lingers in the hearts of others is not your availability, your constant giving, or your relentless efforts to be seen. It is the silence you leave behind, the calm in your absence, and the strength they felt when they were near you. When your energy is no longer diluted by need or overexposure, it becomes rare, like a mirage, visible just enough to stir longing, but never fully captured. The true power lies not in manipulation, but in mastery of self. The more you pull your energy back into your own center, the more magnetic you become. This is not a strategy of games. It is a return to your essence. You realize that missing you is not about absence alone. It is about depth. It is about being so rooted in your truth that anyone who encounters you feels something sacred slipping from their grasp when you walk away. The mirage is not deception. It is the reflection of your growth, a sign that you've chosen stillness over noise, peace over desperation, and sovereignty over emotional dependency. When you honor your space, you teach others how to value it. When you speak less and mean more, your presence begins to echo. And that echo is what follows them, not because you forced it, but because it became undeniable. Let them wonder. Let them feel the emptiness where your laughter used to be, the silence where your wisdom once filled the room. Let your absence be a mirror to their own unawareness. In that space, they will not only miss you, they will begin to realize what your presence truly meant. And in that realization, you are no longer just someone they met. You become someone they cannot forget.